Minister Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. It is now 5 days since the general election, upon which we returned in many ways to two-party politics. We broke away from it with the growth of, to begin with, the BNP, then we saw the Greens, and then in a bigger way we saw UKIP, and indeed in Scotland the SNP, in Wales Plaid. And one of the reasons that politics fragmented is there was, I think, a breakdown of trust with the two so-called main parties, or two and a half main parties, including the Lib Dems. But we went back in this election to two-party politics. Labour and the Conservatives, between them, over 85% of the vote. And, of course, one of the central tenets of election campaigns, there's always the big launch, the big examination. They're normally documents of about 100 pages with everything from policy on the European Union, to immigration, to fisheries, to social policies, to social care, Theresa May, and everything else. But here we are 5 days on, and it seems to me to be quite remarkable that Theresa May is already saying that after 7 years, Tory austerity must end, and I think this is all because that she was seen to be very unsympathetic with a nurse when we talked about public sector pay freezes. We're also seeing, I think, quite dramatic potential backsliding, maybe even U-turns on their European policy. Brexit means Brexit. Seems a long time ago, as we now hear about talk perhaps of a different deal with the single market. And believe me, folks, it won't be very long before we're told that the third Tory manifesto in a row promising net migration will be cut to tens of thousands a year, we'll be told, oh, well, actually, that is unachievable. And on the Labour side, well, last night I was telling you that Corbyn and McDonnell were making it pretty clear that not only under Labour would we leave the European Union, but we'd leave the single market also. And yet today, Keir Starmer, their Brexit spokesman, Sir Keir Starmer, sorry, their Brexit spokesman comes out and says that actually what we need to do is to seek a new deal with the single market. And as for the Lib Dems, well, who can forget Nick Clegg? Who can forget Nick Clegg in 2010 with his promise on student tuition fees, and then after becoming Deputy Prime Minister, he broke it, and they went up, in most cases, to £9,000 a year. So I'm asking you, given the backtracking by the Tories, given the mixed messages coming from Labour, given it's only 5 days since tens of millions of us went out to vote, do you think manifestos are even worth the paper they're written on? It's a question of basic trust, and I want to know what you think. If, like me, you've become deeply cynical and think the whole thing, frankly, is a bit of a waste of time, then call me on 0345 6060 973. If you perhaps think, no, I've got great trust. I voted for Corbyn or May because I believed in what they said and I still think they'll do it, well, of course, you can text me on 84850. And if you're completely confused and not quite sure where to go or how we should even conduct future elections, well, you can tweet me on @LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC. And you can, of course, watch us live on Facebook by going to LBC's Facebook page right now. Robin in Herne Hill, do you think party manifestos at elections are worth the paper they're written on?
No, they're not, because the ineptitude of the costings, like Corbyn said that free hospital car parking in England would cost 162 million, when in fact even the BBC said it would cost 192 million. And we've had the 2005, I don't know whether you remember, there was a Labour MP for Bournemouth after the election took Tony Blair to court because he promised an EU referendum and he didn't deliver it. And the judge said, well, manifestos can mean what the parties want them to mean.
Well, I doubt, Robin, it was a Labour MP from Bournemouth, because they've been pretty Tory for a long time. But I do remember this. There was this challenge, wasn't there, over could you be sued for not carrying out a manifesto? And I think the answer was, well, circumstances can change and therefore manifestos can. And I get that, Robert, as I'm sure you do as well. But when they ask for our votes, are they being sincere, or is the whole thing a completely cynical exercise?
Well, no, I mean, the only person who seems to be keen on manifestos is Andrew Neil, who deserves a medal, because he's the only one who grilled them on their manifestos. But nobody else seemed to do anything. I mean, it was abysmal. This thing with the pension, the death tax, I mean, that was originally introduced by that dreadful man Tony Blair in 1997. At 23,000, but Theresa May seems to think that houses cost £100,000 when they cost £240,000.
Well, actually, the manifesto, in many ways, was that day was the high point of the Tory campaign. They were, was it 24 points ahead in some polls? The manifesto came out, and it went downhill ever since, didn't it?
Mm. So I would like to see them independently costed, and maybe even some form of law things. I mean, maybe Keir Starmer can help, because he's part of a law firm that specialises in stopping Brexit. I believe. Well, allegedly.
Can I say, Robin, and this is with some degree of personal pride, that in 2015, the UKIP General Election Manifesto, which was project managed by Suzanne Evans, who I'm sorry to say is undergoing treatment now for breast cancer, but it looks to be okay. But Suzanne project managed that, and UKIP produced in 2015 the first, and I was leader, the first ever manifesto in the history of British politics that was independently costed by a third party. We got the IFS to do it, and the Times of London said we'd set the gold standard for manifestos. And the bizarre thing was, this time round, Labour and the Lib Dems put out costed manifestos. Yes, sure, some debate, but costed manifestos, and the Tories didn't even bother. So I do at least think that when it was my turn to lead a party into a general election, we did at least try to get third-party endorsement for the sums that we put forward. But, Robert, in terms of them being legally binding, that could never happen, could it?
Well, I mean, I put out my leaflet. I stood as an independent again.
Did you? Yeah.
And I costed all my promises, and I put the sources of where I got the costs from.
OK, well, look, good. I mean, you know, that is an attempt to engage in honest politics. But is the whole exercise, frankly, of party manifestos now being seen by the public? And bear in mind, Robin, we're just 5 days on from this general election. It is looking a bit like a charade, isn't it?
It is. Also, another thing you might ponder is that I've been told that certain university students have voted twice. Is there any truth in that?
I am getting reports back again and again and again from people who are registered to vote by post at their home address, but also registered to vote where they're, you know, in halls of residence or whatever at their universities. I don't want to rush to judgment. The evidence I've been given so far, you know, it's coming in emails, it's coming in letters and messages that are coming into me. But I do think if the Electoral Commission are worth their salt, they should investigate this pretty quickly. And my own view, Robin, would be that students should only vote at their registered address, not where they're at university.
OK, thanks for taking my call.
Thank you very much indeed. And on text I get, hi Nigel, manifestos should be legally binding. The Queen's speeches, well, Ricky in Hastings, they can't be legally binding because circumstances do change. All the politicians are quickly destroying democracy, says Tony. Well, I'm not sure they're destroying democracy, Tony, but they are. I think perhaps, given that we're 5 days on from the last election and it all seems to be broken, maybe destroying trust. The trouble with manifestos is they are not specific enough, I'm told. In the most recent election, the main parties did not set out details of how they would tackle Brexit. The most important question for our country right now, that's Ollie in Basingstoke. Karen says on Facebook, you can't trust manifestos when the Tories write them. Karen, I agree with you, but I would extend it more broadly than just the Tory party. Darren says, no, manifestos are worthless, as politicians never keep their word. And Theo says, Prime Minister May should be gone by Christmas. Well, we will see. There are, apparently, we heard last night from a 1922 committee that the party is now solidly behind her. So that's all right then. Richard, in West Malling, are these manifestos worth the paper they're written on?
Well, obviously not. Fiona Hill and Nick Timothy wrote that manifesto, it seems, took one for the team and then quit the job. But at the same time, Theresa May must have either been complicit in that manifesto or too dim to see what sort of damage it would do to their position. Now, since that's happened, we've seen a reshuffle and we've seen her, basically try and get as many Remainers in place as she can. That's not Brexit means Brexit, is it? I mean, that's something else. That means backpedal means backpedal. Now, how do we hold these people to account for doing this? And not only are people going to lose faith in the Conservative Party, but people are just going to lose faith in party politics, full stop, because you just can't believe anything.
Well, Richard,
it's just not worth voting, is it?
I said at the top of the hour that politics before this election had been fragmenting for several general elections. People have been going to different parties, and I've no doubt that one of the reasons that UKIP grew in the way that it did over those years is because people had simply lost trust and faith in the so-called major parties. But this election saw us return to two-party politics, and my sense is Richard, 5 days on from this election, I think people are going to get disenchanted very, very quickly indeed. It looks like a cynical exercise of telling the punters what you think they want to hear without any genuine intention of meaning it. I mean, how could the Tories, for the third time in a row, have promised to cut net migration to tens of thousands a year, Richard?
Well, there you go. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave the people that have campaigned, posted leaflets, voted to leave the EU, been promised that we would leave the EU? Where does that leave us? How are we going to get out of it now?
There was a caller last night that came on to us and said that he felt like we climbed Everest and now we were starting again from the bottom. I don't think it's as bad as that. I think we will leave the EU, we will leave the Treaty of Rome, but what is clear to me is that Mrs May's strident Brexit means Brexit position now is virtually worthless. Richard, I thank you very much indeed for your call. I cannot in my lifetime remember a general election where within 5 days of the result there has been so much backtracking, backsliding and shifting on parties' manifesto commitments. And I think this is really bad news for that link of trust between voters and those that govern us and represent us in Parliament. I'm asking you, are these manifestos worth the paper they're written on? Well, one person who really does believe in his manifesto, and this may surprise some of you, now, whether you like Donald J. Trump or not, and I can hear some of you throwing your cup of tea at the radio as I speak, but whether you like him or not, the last time I saw the president, and we had dinner, I was there with some of his family, some of his friends, and he was clearly having a tough time. There were judges, members of Congress, doing their utmost to stop him. What they were trying to stop him from doing was carrying out his manifesto. And the abiding memory I will have of that particular meeting is his absolute determination in the face of everything to keep what he saw as his promise to the American people. I was elected to do these things. I'm going to do my damnedest to do them. And you know what? Whether you agree with his politics or any politician that wants to carry out their manifesto, isn't that better? Isn't that more honest? Isn't that more sincere than what we've seen in British politics in the last 5 days, which I think is the most disgraceful display and breach of trust I've ever seen in my lifetime? That's how I feel about it. I wonder how Seamus in Watford feels about all of this. Seamus, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. First of all, it's a pleasure and honour to talk to you. I'm extremely humbled. Things I want to talk about is the 1997 Labour manifesto, where Labour pledged, and I think it's on Migration Watch's website, that every country's got the right to tightly control their borders. And then I think within 30 days they repealed the primary purpose rule. Then obviously there was the Andrew Neither revelation, which I believe you were castigating and vilified on Question Time for talking about. I seemingly recall. And then additionally, I think in 2010, please correct me if I'm wrong, but Mr. Cameron's Tory manifesto didn't mention gay marriage. I'm not here to talk about the merits of it. I'm just talking about the fact that there was nothing in there. Then all of a sudden he just springs it out of the blue, trying to be some kind of a latter-day Roy Jenkins.
I mean, the 1997 manifesto from Labour was very cleverly worded, that every country has the right, but it has the right to control it as it sees fit. So I don't think you can actually do Tony Blair over on that one. I thought the gay marriage thing was really interesting, in that, as you say, there wasn't a whisper of it in the 2010 Conservative manifesto. Nobody, I mean, literally, as an MEP, I think I'd had 2 letters in 10 years on this subject. Nobody was campaigning for gay marriage. Even Stonewall, the biggest gay charity, were campaigning for, an ending to discrimination against gay people, but even they weren't campaigning for it. And then he went and simply did it. I suppose, Seamus, you could argue that maybe doing something that wasn't in the manifesto is better than breaking a promise.
Probably, but it was probably on his mind, and it was probably talked about in the realms of the cabinet sometime before the election. But they just failed to disclose it, which, in my view, is another breach of trust.
No, I agree with that. I mean, maybe for me, the one that really gets me is the Heath Manifesto of 1970, when he says we will negotiate with the European Economic Community, but will only join with the wholehearted consent of the British Parliament and people, and there was no referendum, and in the votes in Parliament, it got down to a majority of 4. And for Edward Heath, that was wholehearted consent.
Yeah,
so this isn't, this isn't new, Seamus, is it? This isn't new. This isn't new, and you're quite right that Blair stretched it, that Cameron didn't even mention it in the case of gay marriage. But the thing, Seamus, that fascinates me is that we are literally just 5 days on from this general election, and Labour are all at sea, and the Tories are breaking everything.
Yeah, it's just a fretful state of politics today, I'm afraid.
So where do we go, Seamus?
Well, I'd follow you, left, right and centre all the way from here to Land's End or John O'Groats. That's my thinking.
Right.
I'm not quite sure. I did vote UKIP, and based on their manifesto, funny enough, which most of it I agree with. To be honest, I'm speechless and I'm thoughtless, and I'm not sure what direction the British people are going.
Seamus, I think what you've just said sums up tonight how many millions of people across this country are feeling right now. There is a complete, in my view, breakdown of trust. I thank you for your call. Thomas in Durham, come on, tell me, Thomas, that you still think politicians' manifesto pledges really mean something.
Well, Nigel, you're talking about manifestos. I think it also extends out to what's been told to people on the doorstep as well, because me and my family weren't going to vote in this general election because we thought it was just too soon after the last general election.
Yeah.
We weren't going to vote. Somebody from the Labour Party came to our door, basically said, "Are you going to vote?" We said, "No, we're not voting at all, and we don't like Corbyn." And they said, "Well, make sure you vote for Labour, your Labour candidate, and Corbyn will definitely be gone after the election." He's still there. He is still there. So
That's a very...
as far as Nigel, all those Labour candidates around the country who told people on the doorstep, "Vote for me, Corbyn will be gone after the election," should stand down, because they're the only reasons why they kept their vote share, because they told us, "Vote for me and Corbyn will be gone."
So, Thomas, you were done like a kipper, weren't you?
Yep. Absolutely con, Nigel. Absolutely con.
I shouldn't laugh. Yeah.
I know they don't trust the Tory, but I tell you what, I'll never trust Labour ever again after what we were told on the doorstep. Never again, Nigel. We'll never fall for that trick ever again.
Thomas, absolutely heartfelt, and I thank you for your call. Chris tweets me, the problem with manifestos is they're so long and nobody reads them except for journalists who focus on controversial points. Well, Chris, I made the point earlier, these manifestos are normally about 100 pages long. Paul says, if I didn't do what I was required to do in my job, I wouldn't get paid. So if manifestos are not carried out, the parties shouldn't. Interesting point of view. By text I get, Nigel, you're so cynical. Surely you trust in Father Christmas. After all, he wrote the Labour manifesto, says Richard in Sussex. Despite Theresa May's result, I believe she is honest and will do what she can. That's why I like her. When I used to, in the old days, laugh at the Tories, says Chris in Northern Ireland. And Susie on Facebook says, the trust has gone. I see the two major parties as deceitful liars. We voted Leave. We won. And now it's being dragged out. I have no faith. I feel let down. Why on earth should we put up with it? John thinks that most of the politicians today need kicking out. Most are liars and just spend most of their energy in attacking the opposition instead of putting this country first. We should be seeking to get the best deals worldwide now and improving the pound instead of dragging our heels and damaging our economy. It's a slightly separate point, John, but there is this issue of trust. Nick in Woburn, do you trust political leaders when they launch their manifestos? Do you, Nick in Woburn, ever read their manifestos?
Well, I read the main crux of them, but in answer to your question, without being quite as cynical as you are, no, you can't. No, you can't trust manifestos for the simple reason they can lay out their main broad ideological strategy, but you can't trust them on the financial side because it will all depend on the amount of economic growth, what's happening in the world, international money markets and everything else. So while you're being very holier than thou, Nigel...
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Where was the actual manifesto for the Leave campaign? Where was the actual manifesto that...
Well, Nick, it wasn't.
Brexit,
Nick,
things like that. Yeah.
Well, Nick, there didn't need to be a manifesto in the referendum because the referendum wasn't a party pledging to be in government. What it was about was saying, should we stay or should we leave? Surely that's fair enough, isn't it?
Yeah, but both those binary choices needed some explanation about if whichever way they went had some kind of strategy or manifesto pledges about what we do over the single market and things like this. This is why we've got all this ooh-ah now over hard Brexit, soft Brexit, and soft Brexit means literally to stay in the EU.
Actually,
there's only two alternatives.
Actually, Nick, you're dead right. Hard Brexit is we leave. Soft Brexit is we leave only in name. And I do think, actually, you make a very good point. It might have been better. It might have been better if the Electoral Commission had said to both camps, tell people what your future vision for the country is. They didn't do it. And I think you actually have a very fair point. Nick, I thank you. Nick thinks I'm too cynical. But hey, guys, it's only 5 days since the general election, and it all appears to be being broken in terms of their manifestos. Well, I'm asking whether manifestos are worth the paper they're written on, given that just 5 days after the general election, both the Labour and Tory ones, or Labour is confused, and the Tories appear to be breaking much of theirs. Theresa May is now saying that this will be an end to austerity, I think because she was seen to come across as being really rather cold and uncaring towards people in the public sector who've not had pay rises for some years. We're also hearing, of course, that Brexit means Brexit appears to be being watered down by the minute, and that maybe the pledge for tens of thousands for the net migration figure will very rapidly be dropped. And as for Labour, well, one of the reasons that Corbyn did so well with former UKIP voters is his manifesto making clear Labour respected the referendum. They wanted to leave the European Union, to leave the single market, and, crucially, to stop the free movement of people. And yet, Sir Keir Starmer, who is their chief Brexit man, says today, actually what we need to do is negotiate some new form of membership. So, to those that say I'm being cynical, I'm doing it because this has all happened in the space of 5 days. I'm not suggesting we fight elections without any form of prospectus being put before the public. But I am saying that I believe what's happened in the last 5 years represents an absolutely fundamental breach of trust between the governors and the governed. Aaron, in Liverpool, how do you feel?
Hi, Nigel. Yes. I know you've just said you're not, but I do feel like you're being a bit cynical, if I'm honest. The way I see manifesto is a blueprint. So it's a party saying this is the kind of goal we want to aim towards. So, you take Labour's, and you've just mentioned about Labour taking UKIP votes. Let's be honest, it wasn't UKIP votes that propped Labour up. It was a number of votes across the country of all ages, of all backgrounds. Some UKIP, I'd definitely go along with that. But things change, finance, viewpoints, everything on a daily basis changes. And so if someone is willing to step up and say, okay, you know what, this is different now, we view this as a different way. Now, I'm not a Tory, but if the Tories are saying, you know what, from the will of the people, we're getting that hard Brexit might not be the way forward. I'm not saying it is or isn't, I don't want to go down that path, but if this is the will of the people that we're getting an idea from the voters, the way they've voted with defeat, you're the one who kind of pushed forward to leave and said the will of the people is spoken. So therefore we should follow that. If people give an idea to a government that this is the approach they want to take, I don't understand why a government can't change their mind. And so I put to you a question. Do you believe that people and ministers and so on and so forth can change their mind and can change their opinion on something? And
Aaron,
they shouldn't be ridiculed for changing their mind.
Of course I do. Of course I do. Circumstances change. The world changes. I get that. Finance changes. Economies have periods of growth. They go into recession. Something happens. Some foreign affairs event, a war, or whatever it may be. I completely understand all of that. But what I am saying to you, and yes, you're absolutely right, what was clever about Corbyn is he picked up different segments of votes all over the country, in particular young votes, and maybe some would say a few of them voted more than once, but we'll examine that as the weeks go on. But what I was saying to you, Aaron, was that to get the UKIP votes, I mean, the reason Labour won Stockton South from the Tories is they got a swing from UKIP. Those voters would not have left UKIP and gone to Labour had that manifesto not been clear in terms of their direction on the single market. And now we see Sir Keir Starmer, going the other way. So I wonder whether, Aaron...
I don't think that could necessarily be true. You can't speak for everyone who voted. And those UKIP voters, I'm not saying you're wrong, but those UKIP voters might have moved because of the manifesto, because of the promises of, nationalising the rail service. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, you said that you didn't believe many people would turn out to vote. Now, would you say you were wrong on that and you misjudged that?
Absolutely. And whenever I'm wrong, I'm prepared to say so. I thought it'd be a low turnout, and I said that before Theresa May launched her manifesto and then Corbyn launched the day after. It seemed to me, Aaron, that it was very, very dull, and that it was the launch of the manifestos that changed everything. So there we are. Manifestos actually do have a central part of our campaign. The problem is, and what I'm examining, I'm not for one moment pretending parties should not, to quote you, have blueprints. Of course they should. What I am suggesting, Aaron, is I've never known in my lifetime such breaches of manifestos in terms of their intentions within 5 days. That's my problem.
I get that point, if the Tories, but I don't mean it rude, the Tories have changed their mind quite often, and yes, I'm not a Tory, but, I think a lot of emphasis is always put on the party that's in power on what they didn't deliver as opposed to their manifesto. And so right now, it's a great point for you to pull on and kind of rally up the nation again on a point of negativity of, they're changing their mind on this again. But what I think is a positive is that more people did come out to vote because of the manifestos, because, it generated a lot of interest. And so people voted with their feet. And if they voted with their feet, and you can't, I'm not saying you're wrong or right, but if you can't say that someone changed their mind and moved from UKIP to Labour or moved from Tory to Labour or Labour to Tory or whatever it was, because of the European Union. I think that became a very clear point early on, that the whole subject wasn't about the European Union. It was about this country and what people wanted to do to take it forward. The European Union being part of that, but that wasn't the sole subject. And so the whole campaign didn't focus solely on it. Now, you know, when you were campaigning, that was your biggest point, and it became
one of them. Yeah,
it was a very valid point. It was a valid point.
I mean, Aaron, look, Aaron, you know, you're quite right. I have been very cynical from the top of the hour, and the question I asked was loaded. Are manifestos worth the paper they're written on? The answer, of course, is in one way they really are, because it was the launch of a Tory manifesto and then the launch of a Labour manifesto that completely transformed this general election. In Theresa May's case, she bombed. And Aaron, be fair to me, in Jeremy Corbyn's case, I said on LBC that night on air, he was full of energy, vim, vigour and enthusiasm and looked like he really believed in what he was saying, whether it made sense or not. So manifestos do matter. I just wonder whether there is a compromise position, whether actually maybe they should just be blueprints without too much detail. Because as soon as you start to put detail in, it's very difficult for any of it ever to get met. And I worry about the trust that exists, Aaron, between the public, the voters, and those in Parliament.
Okay, yeah, and I can completely see. What I would say on that is, if you didn't put detail in, so look at how much Labour's manifesto got. Kind of, you know, so many people coming out saying, oh, he's Father Christmas, he's trying to give you everything because he won't get in government. But the amount of detail that was put in that of how they were going to reach that budget, I think that the Tories lost a lot of votes because they didn't put any detail in.
Well,
again,
yeah, okay.
I challenge that only from a sense of view of people like to see that, you know what, you've thought it through. You've put some thought behind it. And I'll be honest, from the very beginning, I wasn't sure I was going to vote for. I am Labour, but Corbyn didn't really, because I hadn't seen much of him. He didn't come out in the press much, you know, the infighting that was in there. And then he completely turned it around and got the troops to rally behind him. And I was totally behind Corbyn in the end, because not necessarily just because of Corbyn. I don't see it as an American election where you vote for one person. You vote for the party, and the party were out there knocking on doors, pushing this manifesto.
They were. No, they were. And if it wasn't that Theresa May's biggest mistake, she tried to make the whole thing presidential, and in the end that fell to bits, didn't it?
Yeah, it showed her personality, which I don't want to criticise her too much, because, you know, there was elements of her where, you know, she has taken over and had to carry on that message going forward of leaving, of the Tories' hard Brexit when she didn't want to leave originally. And I don't think she's done necessarily a bad job of that. But changing her mind now, and this sounds like I'm sticking up for her when I'm not even a Tory, to change her mind now, I don't think is necessarily, I'm not saying it is or isn't, and I'll be honest, I don't fully know what she's come out and said, but to change her mind to say necessarily we may draw back a bit on it being hard Brexit might not necessarily be a bad thing, because so far the EU and Britain in the discussions haven't met any middle ground at all.
Good thing or bad thing? Good thing or bad thing, she's a bit wobbly. Aaron, you make wonderful arguments. I've no doubt you'll be a Labour candidate before too long. Chris tweets, you know, President Trump is the only politician who has kept 3 of his 4 promises. The 4th was shot down by the courts. And I get a tweet, when you know you're unlikely to win, you can promise whatever you like with no possible way of ever having to deliver. Well, who can disagree with that? I'm asking you whether manifestos are worth the paper they're written on, given that both Labour and the Tories appear to be backtracking on theirs within 5 days of a general election. Of course, the answer is yes, manifestos do matter. Whether it's the 100 pages that I know no one reads, or the distillation of that we see, read or hear through the media, of course manifestos matter. But are we being very badly, cynically misled by career politicians who make promises they think we want to hear, without actually ever having any intention of carrying them out? Kathy is by far the most cynical texter I get, and she says most manifestos can't be backed up. They just put something together to let us see who the best liar is. Kathy, that really is too much. John in Loughton, what do you think? Good evening.
It's a mess, isn't it? An absolute mess. The whole thing, start to finish.
I think so. Yes, I agree with you.
As far as the manifestos are concerned, it seems like it's an exercise as to how popular you can be without accountability. So, for example, in my opinion, I think the young people were very, very attracted to the fact that 100 billion worth of debt was going to be paid off. All their student fees were not going to exist anymore. That went in the manifesto. Very popular. Theresa May, she probably lost on the popularity stakes. That's why she didn't do as well. She came out and said something that perhaps she shouldn't have said, was that there's a problem with the with social care and how we fund it. But the problem is that my opinion of whether or not to try and be popular all the time, it sort of goes back, I don't know, it's not that I was a very good student at school at all, but I do remember one thing about something. If you're trying to be popular all the time, it leads to bigger divisions than when you first started. Populism leads to polarization. And you look at Latin America, and I believe that that's exactly what happened over there. All the political institutions collapsed. No one trusted any of the politicians. People were trying to be popular to get in, and then they couldn't deliver on their promises. So then they never believed them next month or next time they ever say anything. And it's looking remarkably similar here. We've never been more divided as we've attempted to be popular.
It's very interesting, John, that you raised the word populism, because over the course of the last couple of years, populism has been aimed at people like me, people like Donald Trump. We are the populists. It's as if we're really bad, nasty people because we're standing up for a point of view against the establishment. Would it not be fair to say that Jeremy Corbyn fought a populist campaign?
Absolutely, 110%. I believe, rightly or wrongly, I don't believe he really cares about too much other than a little bit of an anarchistic point of view, and he wants to get his hand on the company's credit card as quickly as he can. That's what it looks like to me. So I think he'd say anything he'd like. He doesn't have to back it up. And he's been very popular on the back of it. So,
he could have won, John, couldn't he? How about that?
And guess what? Funny thing, you think he had one, wouldn't you? And to be honest, it leaves you disillusioned. That's the truth of the matter is. And if anybody ever wanted to be a politician or take this responsibility, I think it's almost a thankless task. I don't blame you at all in standing down and not getting too involved, because I cannot see that there's anybody, when you look around, who, given 10 minutes under scrutiny, will not be very popular very much longer, and as a result will get voted out. It means we'll have election after election and we'll start looking like Bolivia. That's what I think.
Well, that's a very graphic description of what the future might be. John, actually, you are right about one thing. I mean, I've been in this place in Strasbourg now for 18 years, which is a hell of a long time. And I do loathe the career politician that says what he or she thinks makes them popular for the next 20 minutes. But equally, I have to be honest, I have met lots of people in politics who are very genuine, very sincere in what they do, work damned hard, work hours and travel, in a way that most people wouldn't even contemplate, and generally are hated by their neighbours, abused in their local pubs. It's not always the easiest game. John, you raise a very good point. That's the last time I'm ever going to be nice about politicians on this programme. Otherwise, they'll be waiting for me outside the studio. Tom in Bow, has our trust been breached within 5 days of us voting for these parties on their manifestos?
I don't believe so at all. I think the Labour manifesto has motivated people at a level that's not been seen for an extremely long time, and I don't think they've U-turned on any of it at all. There's a conversation now because of Theresa May's poor decision-making that opens up a different story to talk about Europe. But you're completely on a different wavelength, in my opinion, because this election was not about Brexit at all. As much as you would love to bring every discussion back to Brexit, this was not a vote on Brexit. This was a vote on hope and an alternative ideas versus more of the same. In fact, we're going to take for granted. In fact, we're not going to bother about thinking about a manifesto costing anything. We're going to take it for granted. This is the kind of open goal tap in. And it would only benefit the kind of extreme parties, the extreme end of politics that the likes of you are responsible for.
Oh, right. So,
it would
hang on,
if manifestos didn't exist and you could bleat on just about Europe and not talk about any other policy to do with the social...
Hang on, Tom. Well, let me agree with you.
Suit you very well.
Let me agree with you on one point and disagree with you on another. What I agree with you on is this general election, in the end, was not about Brexit. I agree with that entirely. That was blown away. We had 2 appalling terrorist attacks and an argument that began with social care that led on to the whole attitude towards public services, spending and everything else. Where I disagree with you, fundamentally, is how dare you call me extremist when the point of view that I pushed for a quarter of a century was supported by over half the British public in a referendum. Are you suggesting, Tom in Bow, on LBC, that over half the country are extremists?
Where you get 48%, 52%. And when you talk about...
Tom, I asked you a question. Tom, we had 50 years of lies. I gave you the lie of 1970, Edward Heath, saying we wouldn't join the common market without the wholehearted consent of Parliament and the people. We had none of it.
From talking about anti-establishment when your whole privileged life is about establishment as you can get.
Tom, I tell you what, Tom. I don't know whether you've come on to have a discussion or just to shout, but I'm going to ask you the question that I asked you earlier again. Do you think that 52% of the voting public are extremists because they voted for Brexit?
I don't think it's an extremist vote, but I think you are motivated by lies, and it's all you want to talk about. You want to bring every conversation back to Europe. And you're
when 75%,
based on a lie that you're an anti-establishment and you're an anti-career politician when you spent how many years sat in the European Parliament?
Tom, I've spent 18 years trying to do myself out of a job. I am the turkey that voted for Christmas. Tom, I hope you enjoyed that. It was fun. Andrew in Winsford, my last caller of the evening. Andrew, what is your trust in career politicians 5 days on from this general election and their manifesto promises?
Nigel, I think you're a fantastic optimist.
Right, okay.
That's what I think. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, both parties. The last caller, the only thing he was right on is it wasn't to do with Brexit. Both parties said it's a done deal. In fact, Corbyn was on Sunday, wasn't he? He sort of mumbles his way through the single market. We're leaving it because he doesn't really want to bring it up too much. Yeah. He wants to kind of just skip over it. And then, as soon as it's over, on the 10 o'clock news, the BBC come on and go, oh, Brexit could be... What? I was on the computer in 5 minutes writing my complaint out. What's it got to do with Brexit? Why are they all talking about Brexit?
I don't know. Andrew, I think you are like a lot of people. You are genuinely confused by what has happened in this general election and the aftermath of it. And I promise you one thing, Andrew, we're going to be having this conversation for a very, very long time. I don't know whether there's another general election coming up, but what I do know, Andrew, is within 5 days, a lot of promises have been breached. I thank you. It's the last call I got time for this evening. My final thought is this. Yes, manifestos do matter. They matter so much that actually it was the launch of the Conservative and Labour manifestos that transformed this election. And it went from being a 24-point lead in the end to just a 2-point lead. So they do matter. But I do think it's a big problem if politicians overpromise in their manifestos, if they say things they don't believe with their heart and soul. And I think that is corrosive. It leads to a breakdown of trust. This election saw us return to two-party politics. But if that trust is breached on those manifestos, Conservative more than Labour, I suspect, given that they're in government, that I wonder whether we may see the fragmentation of politics happening again at a future election. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'm in this chamber next to me, and I'll be talking to Mr Juncker. I hope Mr Barnier will be there as well, and I'll be doing that within a few days of Britain's renegotiation with the European Union beginning. It promises to be a very lively day.